1 week season.
Welcome to Solo Ship Week 12. I'm Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by JM to Win from 1 week season. JM, I thought I had one of my best weeks of content last week. There was actually some guys that I was high on that, I ended up jamming into a bunch of my lineups like Jameson Williams, David Montgomery, who ended up doing really well. I was absolutely wrong on the Pittsburgh passing offense. So I had a ton of them, and that it made my that kind of torpedoed my single entry rosters. I had a bunch of George Pickens, Russell Wilson, but I came within one Chase Brown catch or one Will Dissly catch in the Sunday night game of winning the blitz on FanDuel for the third time this season. But I ended up with a fourth place finish, I think, on FanDuel, so that won me some money there. I made money in the slant, but lost money in the Millie Maker with the same 150 set, which is a lesson there about you don't necessarily want to play the same rosters in both contests because they're very different. But yeah, how was your week 11, and what are your initial thoughts on week 12?
Yeah, week 11, I primarily I played single entry 3 max. I built like 5 or 6 rosters and didn't have any Taysom Hill, and so that was basically the week. But I was also like you, I was really attacking that Pittsburgh passing attack. And so even if I'd had Taysom Hill, I'm probably not winning a tournament last week. So it was fun. It was fun to have, we were high on Kendrick Bourne. And so it was fun to get that. I was high on Jonnu Smith. So it was fun to get that, but still not quite enough last week, especially with the way the Pittsburgh passing attack went. This week, I think that it's an interesting week. We have only 4 teams implied to score north of 25 points. All of them are expected to win in blowout fashion or at least win handily. So I think that this week kind of comes down to, does one of these teams win so handily that they pull what the Lions pulled in week 11, where they're like, well, we're not really concerned about the other team coming back. Let's just use this for live game reps. Or do some of these, potential easy wins become competitive game environments? I think there are a couple of those that could develop. And do some of these lower total games have high end upside? And I think that because all of these are kind of thin bets, there's a good chance that only one of them plays out, right? Because if 4 or 5 of them play out, then there's no real edge gained. It's like, okay, this thing I was on hit, I got in Seattle and Arizona, and it was a shootout, but so was Green Bay and San Francisco, and Kansas City did what the Lions did last week, and the Patriots kept things close against the Dolphins, right? If all of these games, if that happens, you don't really gain an edge. But if just one game or 2 games play out differently and the rest of them play out as expected, there's a chance that those being on those 2 games could make a huge difference on the slate, where maybe everybody else is scoring in the 170s or low 180s and you're scoring in the 210s, right? And so I think that this is an interesting week in the way that it sets up.
Yeah, just actually one comment on Taysom Hill. I'm so frequently overweight him that I was instinctively rooting for him on Sunday, and then I realized no, I'm way under I'm not way under the field. He wasn't that highly owned. I have 2% and he's 6% owned. And
I had 20% or more in multiple weeks this year, to where it's I'm sure if I played MME, I would have been overweight the field, but doing single entry 3 max, he just wasn't on my radar. And even that was a mistake, but yeah, that was tough.
Yeah. So, but on to this week. Yeah. So we have 10 games on DraftKings, 11 on FanDuel. I think I see it in a similar way to the way that you see it, but I was going to express it a little bit differently. That I just think that it's a little bit thin. Everything's a little bit thin because we just don't have a bunch of games, and a lot of the really terrible defenses are not on the slate. So it's there's a lot of things that I think are fine, but the things that I think are fine are potentially going to be very, very overowned. Where people are going to be too confident in the cash game build, as often happens. Ownership's going to consolidate around a few different plays. And so I do think it's a week where I'll probably aim to get much different, and not because I don't like the plays that are chalk, but just because I think the field will have, too much confidence. And then I think Geno Smith and Brian Robinson and maybe Jacoby Myers will have way too much ownership. And I don't have anything against Geno Smith. I just I'd probably rather play Kyler Murray in that game, right? Kyler Murray is projected a little bit under Geno Smith. He's the underdog quarterback in that game, and he's priced a little bit higher than Geno Smith. But Kyler Murray has the rushing upside. So median projection, Geno Smith probably does have a higher median, if we ran the slate 1,000 times. But like Kyler Murray has the outlier scores with his rushing ability. So I guess maybe starting a quarterback in that particular game, like, is that a game environment that you're targeting, or is there another game environment that maybe strikes?
Yeah, that's my favorite game environment. I think that you can paint a picture of the Chiefs doing what the Lions did last week because they're still trying to figure out this offense. You can paint a picture of Drake May keeping things close against the Dolphins and that being a competitive game. You can paint a picture of Shane Steichen figuring out a way to keep things close against the Lions. But in terms of like pure shootouts, I think this game really stands out. I also really like, so Arizona, 4 games this year where they've scored 17 or fewer points, 4 games where they've allowed 15 or fewer, but also 5 games where they've scored 28 plus, 4 games where they've allowed 27 plus. Kyler has 5 games of 15.8 or fewer DraftKings points, but 4 games of 25 plus DraftKings points. And so these barbell outcomes, people tend to avoid them, but that's what wins tournaments is like these players get priced and rostered based on their average out. Well, they get priced based on their average output, which in a barbell scenario, that helps us, right? Because the upside is higher than the price tag indicates. And then they get rostered based on like people look through game logs and they're like who's the most consistent is what people really gravitate toward as opposed to who has the highest ceiling. So they look through Kyler and they're like, these low scoring games, like what if that happens this week? Well, even if he scores 18 or 19, you're not winning a tournament with him, right? So it's like, I love that he has the upside. He and McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. have been heavily correlated. So yeah, I like the idea of attacking this game as like my primary game to attack through. But again, I think these 5 spots we highlighted, Green Bay, San Francisco being the other one, I think all of them have potential to be what makes a difference on the slate. There's also potential that none of them play out in such a way that they make a difference. And then everything's just kind of flat scoring across the board. But no, I'm with you. I think that outside of like running back chalk is fine as always, as almost always is. Pass catcher chalk, I think this week is really thin. And in terms of like, these guys are chalk because there's not a lot else to like. And it's like, oh, well, these guys get volume and, the matchup's not great, but they get volume. And sometimes the early week talk that's very projection driven ends up changing quite a bit deeper into the week. But I think that these guys, because there's not a lot to like in other spots, I think I could see this kind of sticking this week. So yeah, I think this is a good week to get different at pass catcher, to get different in the way you're stacking games. I think that's going to be where the edge will ultimately end up being.
Yeah, I think you just actually ran through almost in order the list of games that I was going to talk about when you're saying like, oh, the Chiefs, could pull a Lions and from last week, and then you were talking about some of the other games like Green Bay, San Francisco. But yeah, I mean, I do think that I think it's a week, like I usually do. We'll probably roll out 5 or 6 single entry rosters, and I'll make sure that I stack them. Like I'll probably play like one Jacoby Myers roster, but I'll have Cortland Sutton running it back and have probably Bo Nix at quarterback. And I don't want to have more like Jacoby Myers. I guess starting at the Chiefs, looks like Isaiah Pacheco is not going to play, and so that kind of elevates Kareem Hunt. I think we had been looking at Devin Achane, who I do like this week, and Brian Robinson chalk, who I wasn't as high on, just because the Commanders tend to split things up in their backfield. How do you see Kareem Hunt shaking up the running back chalk? And then I'll also add, we just got potential Amir Abdullah with Zamir White and Alexander Madison, I think both doubtful. So he's 4,400 on DraftKings and a very, very appealing 5,000 on FanDuel. So I guess thoughts on the running back chalk, Kareem Hunt and Amir Abdullah.
Yeah, I mean with cheap running backs, like just in terms of where you're spending salary and what type of points you're getting, I would have to say I'd rather play Tommy DeVito or TJ Hawkinson or Sam Laporta or like any of these guys over the cheap Raiders running back, just because Raiders running back has been a wasteland for raw production. Brian Robinson, I'm with you in that, this is a dude who's caught I think 2 passes in his last 6 games. So you're really just relying on the carries, and he's top 17 carries once this year. So really popular guy who doesn't catch passes and doesn't see enough carries to typically get the 100-yard bonus. Even in a good matchup, you really need the touchdowns to shake out in your favor. And even if he gets 2 touchdowns, that might only be 20 points, right? And so I'm not scared to fade Brian Robinson. I think Kareem Hunt, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, but against the Panthers, RB2s have often been better than RB1s because it's a long season and you're dominating this game. And so you're like, all right, let's give 15 to 17 carries to our RB2. But Isaiah Pacheco's coming back next week. Kareem Hunt, like they haven't been worried about preserving Kareem Hunt's body for the playoff run, right? Like 27 touches, 24 touches, 22, 28, 21, and then a game of 14 last week. So I think that we see Kareem Hunt actually get 22 to 27 touches against the Panthers because why not, right? Like they don't need to preserve his body. Pacheco's coming back next week. Like, thank you, Kareem Hunt, for doing what you've done. Like, here's a heavy carry game to send you out the door against the Panthers, right? Like, go rack up some stats. So I actually think that whatever chalk Kareem Hunt develops into will be pretty sharp at his price tag, right? Like, DraftKings came through and just like cut prices across the board. They're like, Black Friday sale, pricing's going down. But part of that, like a lot, that hasn't led to me being like, oh, there's a bunch of cheap guys now. It's like, a bunch of guys are less overpriced than before, right? Like pricing was so aggressive this year and scoring has been so far down that most of these guys I'm looking at like, yeah, they're cheaper now. They're closer to where they should be priced. But Kareem Hunt was one of these where it was like, man, if Pacheco sits, he's just a screaming value at 5,700. So I mean, I think he's a sharp play and I wouldn't overthink that one.
Yeah, actually, I don't really know what was going on like with his price in particular. It seems like they dropped his price $1,000, maybe in anticipation of Pacheco coming back. But yeah, now Pacheco doesn't like. It looks like Pacheco's not coming back. So I think Kareem Hunt will be hard to get away from for me. Just the reasons you outlined that a lot of times, like teams aren't looking at things the same way we are, right? Like they don't know that the guy's underpriced on DraftKings, so they're not going to overload him on carries or receptions or anything or targets. But in this case, like it does make sense for the Chiefs to like Kareem Hunt might be the RB2. It's just that the RB1 is not going to play. So, so like that makes sense to like target him against Carolina. A couple of guys I know from from reading that I think you're high on or priced right around the same area that I think I'll probably want to be over the field on, at least in multi-entry, is the Tampa Bay running backs.
Yeah.
I wanted to know if you saw any like differentiation between them. I love the idea of like pairing them with the Bucs defense, which I don't think we'll see really high ownership. I question whether Tommy DeVito is going to finish this game. I don't really understand why he's getting the start over Drew Lock. Any comments there?
I think he's getting the start over Drew Lock because the fans love him. Like literally, that's what I think. I think they're like, well, lost season, like the fans love the memes. Let's throw them out there. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to draw much distinction between Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, but we know that like carries are not as valuable as targets in PPR scoring, right? So like these guys are seeing, let's say 10 carries a game. Brian Robinson's seeing 16 carries a game. At 5 yards a carry, that's like 3 points that you're losing, right? But then these guys are seeing multiple targets every single game. Rachaad White, last 4 games, 7, 3, 6, and 6 targets. Bucky Irving last 4 games has been sorry, I've got a sinus cold that I picked up, but 3, 3, 7, and 3, right? So Rachaad White, this is why you've seen the production a little bit higher on White than on Irving, is because he's seeing a few more targets than Irving. But I think both guys are underpriced. We'll just look at the scoring that they've had, right? Rachaad White with the 19-pointer last week, 12, 16, 29. I mean, that's tremendous value for 5.4K. And then Bucky Irving not too far behind him, a bunch of 3 double-digit games these last 4. So, yeah, really like the Bucs running backs. I like in small field play, like 200 entry, 300 entry stuff. I like the idea of playing them together plus Kareem Hunt, right? Because they've gone for like 32, 35, and 45 combined points. If they go for 45 combined points, that's keeping you on like a 210, 215 point pace in a way that nobody else is getting. But yeah, and then also really like the idea of just splitting them up because the production is not going to come down the middle. One of them is going to outscore the other and get pretty close to that 4x salary multiplier. So yeah, Rachaad White's like a slight favorite to me, but I like both guys and I think it's sharp. And I think with Kareem Hunt opening up, these guys will be, not they were going to be popular, but they'll go even more overlooked.
So you had mentioned like Drake May earlier, just sticking with running backs. I actually, I think Devin Achane is probably going to be the guy that I have the hardest time getting away from. We'll have to see like where Kareem Hunt gets projected, right? I think those two are probably going to be my 2 highest owned running backs. And like one of my favorite pairings, I think on the week is actually going to be Devin Achane and Drake May, and maybe not even bother trying to differentiate like the Patriots receivers, maybe like Hunter Henry or something like that. I guess any thoughts on the Patriots Dolphins game? you think that's a game that could make a splash with the Dolphins this week?
Yeah, I think that Devon Achane is the best like on paper play on the slate. And so I'm with you on not being able to like if I build a roster where I'm like, ooh, like smaller field, Bucky Irving plus Rashad White, but then I want to get Kareem Hunt in here. And it's like, oh shoot, I can't play Devon Achane. Like that's my first thought, right? So he's definitely kind of a priority play. And then like Drake May, he's got this broad range of outcomes, but we love that, right? He's going to attack downfield. He's going to run the ball. He's going to be aggressive. And so it's not going to surprise me if the Patriots score under 20 points, but it also won't surprise me if they score 24 or even 27. And then all of a sudden the Dolphins are forced to score 27, 30, 35, whatever, right? So I think that this is a very interesting setup to say Drake May plus, like you said, Hunter Henry, because that's the clearest pathway to, especially against this Miami defense, has been good against wide receivers, the clearest pathway to picking up points through the air. And then throw on Achane on the other side. You can also throw on Tyreek Hill on that roster. But yeah, I like you're painting a picture of like this explosive Dolphins offense getting into a competitive game with a high upside guy in Drake May. And I just think it's a really nice package that tells a good story and like has clear pathways to a tournament win.
So actually, a couple of guys I wanted to call out because I've been doing really well on FanDuel this season. So I actually wanted to call out Josh Jacobs. He's the 12th highest owned or 12th highest priced running back on FanDuel, and I think he's like maybe 7th on DraftKings. So much more appealing on FanDuel. Another guy on FanDuel, kind of got a better price. Actually, two other guys, Ramondre Stevenson and James Conner. And I think Conner's in play on both sites. I'd probably be likely to use Conner in like a game stack, maybe like a Geno Smith, kind of game stack or roster on DraftKings. I think on FanDuel, I think he'll be like a kind of a core piece. And I guess any thoughts on like Conner, Stevenson, and Josh Jacobs in particular, and kind of pivot to that to the Green Bay San Francisco game.
Yeah, I like the idea of Josh Jacobs on FanDuel. I'm not a big FanDuel player because I've never had success on FanDuel, and so, but yeah, with the pricing discrepancy, I certainly think like he's one of these guys who falls just out of my list on DraftKings because there's so much to like at the running back position. But if you give him a cheaper price tag, he would go back up onto my list. James Conner, he's one of these guys who it seems we roster him for the consistency, right? He's like always 17 to 22 points. No games north of 23 this year, but he did have a 28-pointer down the stretch last year, a 30-pointer down the stretch last year with Kyler on the field. So it's like he has that within his range of outcomes, and he has the high floor. So yeah, I like James Conner in this spot. And Ramondre, I mean, 5,900 is an attractive price tag, and I think that we can get in a trap on like individual players of being like, oh well, this guy's not scoring 20 plus frequently enough, but then we go to guys who are scoring 20 plus even less frequently, like it's like Ramondre for some reason sticks in our heads is like, well, if he's not scoring 20 plus, he's not worth it. But then we go to guys who are never scoring 20 plus. So yeah, I mean, Ramondre, he's got, in terms of like 20 plus point games, 19 plus point games, more than like anybody else that you could choose in this price range. So yeah, I mean, I think he's perfectly viable this week and best in like a story where you're telling the story of the Patriots keeping things close, because that's how he has scored this year's games that are competitive for the Patriots. So like Drake May plus Ramondre, I think makes even more sense than Ramondre solo, because you're telling a story of the Patriots keeping this game close. And then, you get the opportunity to bring back explosive Dolphins pieces.
So actually, looking at the teams and implied point totals, the team with the highest implied point total, I think, is Washington. And I think that Jaden Daniels will see. Actually, no, sorry, it's Detroit, but then Washington's right behind them. So just with Washington, I think Jaden Daniels is showing up a lot of places as the highest projected owned quarterback or second highest owned projected quarterback. He kind of fits in for me in the category of fine. I might have him on a single entry roster. I might not. I don't like. He's not really breaking slates, and neither is anybody else on Washington. It seems to be the kind of offense that is an intelligent offense in terms of like managing an NFL team that's potentially going to make the playoffs, where you just spread out carries and touches to a bunch of people on the team so that nobody gets overworked. Thoughts on Jaden Daniels, and if you would use him in a roster, who would you pair him with?
Yeah, I remember back in like 2015, Head Chopper said, you should think of every player you put on a roster, not just in terms of what they do for your roster, but also what they take away from your roster, right? So like if you're spending $7K on Jaden Daniels, hoping for like a 4X salary multiplier, you're taking away the opportunity to spend that $7K on somebody who has the opportunity to go for 35 points, right? And you have to go kind of skew cheaper as a result in other positions. So that's kind of how I look at Jaden Daniels. Like it won't surprise me if he puts up 25, 28 points, but it will surprise me if building through Jaden Daniels is the optimal way to maximize points on the slate. If I were pairing him, probably with Noah Brown, because Noah Brown's out-snapped Terry McLaurin last week. He's basically had like a bigger role than Terry McLaurin the last 3 weeks. And he's just not hitting, but he certainly is capable of hitting at some point along the line. So Noah Brown would be the guy I would pair him with, but probably won't be playing Jaden Daniels myself.
I used to do my prime time game shows with Head Chopper. So I've been missing that recently. But yeah, good shout out to him. If I play Jaden Daniels, I think I might actually pair him with Terry McLaurin because I think
who's Noah Brown.
I think Noah Brown's going to be sneaky chalk. You see like the highly projected quarterback, and he doesn't have any receiver that's projected to be really highly owned. But I think Noah Brown is got much better price than Terry McLaurin, and has been out snapping him. But I think everybody's going to see that, and Terry McLaurin's a guy that can get there with like a splash play. But yeah, I don't know. Then again, I don't always like the idea of playing a bad play just because he's going to be under. So I don't know what I'm going to do there, but I think if I'm going to play Jaden Daniels, I think I'd probably play him with McLaurin instead of Noah Brown. So I think Noah Brown will see the much higher ownership. Let
me jump in real quickly because I think that was critical what you said. Like it seems obvious. I don't usually like playing a bad play just because they're low owned, but I think that's a mistake people make all the time. Is like, oh, this play's low owned, right? And it can hit, but you also have to assess, is it actually a good play? Because a lot of times we can get good plays at low ownership, or we have a week where like the high owned plays aren't really that great, and so we can take the not that great plays that are low owned but have a lot of ceiling. I just think that was a sneaky sharp thing that you said, because like that's I think a big mistake a lot of especially newer DFS players make is like, oh, this guy's low owned, he can hit, and if it's a bad play, it's a bad play, whether it's low owned or not.
It's the step-by-step process of like learning daily fantasy sports. Is you start off not considering ownership at all, and then the second thing you do is you consider it way too much.
Yeah.
and like I always say, like you don't get fantasy points for low ownership. You get fantasy points for fantasy points, and it's like it's important to know like when to, and that's what makes the game so difficult. It's like knowing when to play the chalk and knowing when not to. And how to fit that onto a roster that also is not all chalk or all, these all pivots. So pivoting to, I guess the other team, that has a really high implied point total, Detroit. It's interesting because I thought they would be higher owned. I thought people would see last week, and a lot of people, Detroit would see very high ownership because they have a high implied point total playing the Colts. I think it's less likely they hit. I think Jacksonville might just be like, similar to the Giants, maybe, just folding up the tent and going home. And so I think that part of like Detroit actually did sit their guys in the fourth quarter last week. It's just they did all that damage in about 3 quarters. So I wouldn't necessarily count on as much of an explosion this week, but then they also might be facing an offense that has a better chance of keeping things remotely close. I think, for me personally, the way I like approaching this game, I like the idea of playing Anthony Richardson. I think he'll be one of my, top like 6 quarterbacks or so. Somebody I'll probably look to play in single entry, and I'll probably look to pair him with Detroit, players, maybe like Josh Downs, but then at least, run it back with at least one Detroit player. Thoughts on that game and Anthony Richardson and the Lions?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm playing Lions, I want to play Jahmyr Gibbs because, he just has such a high hit rate when the Lions score 30 plus real life points, which I think they can do here. And then I want to play guys who can hit for big plays. So I'd prefer Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams over Amon-Ra St. Brown because St. Brown, right? Like he scored 41 last week, but he's only topped 21 points twice this year before that. Once was in that game against Tampa that was a loss and Goff threw the ball over 50 times. And once was in a 31-29 game against Minnesota. Like that's the profile we're typically chasing with him. And like you said, I think the Jags are kind of an outlier type of situation where it was like very clear to the Lions early in that game, like, okay, the Jags are not coming back in this one. So let's go ahead and like run our offense and let's get some live reps out here. You know, the Patriots did that a lot in 07. Like, let's get some live reps out here and just continue to sharpen ourselves as an offense against a real live NFL defense. And so I don't think we run into that same scenario here. And I think the Colts can keep it close, but not necessarily close enough that St. Brown ends up having to put up like a 33 to 35 point, right? So I think the Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, guys who can, you know, they can see 6 targets and still put up a tournament winner, or Jahmyr Gibbs because of the way that he functions in this offense. The Anthony Richardson thing, like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm ready to buy it, because what was weird last week was how much the accuracy came to, right? 67% completion rate when he literally couldn't top 50% before that. I don't know how much that's going to be sticky against a good Lions defense, but I guess Richardson falls in the bucket of like guys I'm probably not gravitating toward, but certainly not arguing against, if that makes sense. I think that's kind of how I see this game.
My Anthony Richardson argument is just that he's about $1,000 cheaper than week 1, when I think he was the chalk. He's playing at home. It's indoors. It tends to help, you know, quarterbacks. And I think rushing quarterbacks, because they hit their upside with, you know, the rushing yards and, you know, rushing touchdowns. So I think they're more like matchup independent. So like Detroit doesn't have necessarily a defense we want to attack. That might not matter if Richardson's able to get one of those long runs. It like kind of elevates him for his price tag. And really, like, Detroit is a defense that like you don't want to run on, but like passing on them has been okay. Or they at least give up receptions. So that kind of is what leads me to Josh Downs, maybe over Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman. But I it's not as strong of a play as I would like to love. But, you know, again, with only 10 games to choose from. And I guess actually one other game I think we already touched on the game, but any thoughts on like the Tampa Bay passing offense? That's something that hasn't really been discussed, at least as, you know, I've seen, like, kind of looking around the industry, but like there's some uncertainty there with Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, always cheap. And, you know, yeah, they're playing a Giants team that might put up a Jaguars type performance this week. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Baker's got 5 games this year of 27 plus DraftKings points. And obviously, most of those came with Chris Godwin on the field, right? All but one of those came with Chris Godwin on the field. But one of those came without Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. He's certainly capable of putting up 27 plus points with Mike Evans and no Chris Godwin. And I think that people are going to kind of overlook him this week. He's only 6,100. So yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of Baker-led stacks in this one. And yeah, I mean, that's about it, right? It's like this passing offense has been awesome. And they're going to find a way. Maybe he puts up, you know, 17, 19, 20. Like, he's not going to bomb more than likely. So maybe he puts up kind of like a middling score, but also he has those like high-end scores within his range of outcomes.
I guess like any final thoughts on the week? Any other game environments you want to touch on?
Yeah, we didn't touch on Green Bay and San Francisco. I mean, I think you know, my journey through that game was like, I didn't like anything from it when I was kind of looking at the slate. And then when I went to write up the game, I was like, really? Nothing from this game? And then I looked at the implied team totals and it was like, oh, well, this kind of backs up the fact that I don't like anything from this game outside of Christian McCaffrey. But I do think that when you zoom out, you still have that question of like, really nothing from this game? Because this could be like a 33-30 type of game. So I think that's worth thinking about as well in terms of how this game could develop as another one to potentially target. And yeah, outside of that, nothing else.
Yeah, my thought on the San Francisco Green Bay games, my concern is like we can't predict the Green Bay offense. Like, other than like I do like Jacobs on FanDuel, but like in terms of the passing offense, it's difficult to know. They have so many good places they can go that it might cost money over time trying to predict that. And that San Francisco's offense is so banged up that maybe it just ends up being Christian McCaffrey. And they want to protect Brock Purdy a little bit. I think Purdy's still questionable. But I kind of assume Purdy will play, but maybe he's not up to full strength. And so it ends up being a Christian McCaffrey game. I think Juwan Jennings is still well priced. So like those are probably the 2 pieces from the San Francisco side I'd go to. Actually, there's one more player on my list we didn't talk about. It's a Kansas City player. And I know you mentioned him in a previous show, but Xavier Worthy is a guy I wanted to touch on. Just similar play to Jameson Williams last week, where he's a guy that doesn't need volume to get there. I don't think he's as good a play as Jameson Williams, just because the Jaguars' offense gives up, I think, the most or one of the most like yards per catch in the NFL. But I know he's a player you touched on. So any thoughts on Xavier Worthy?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's a sharp play this week in terms of like risk reward. Most of these guys in the 5K range like are going to miss most of the time, but most of them, when they hit, they're not going to hit for 25 plus, which Worthy could do. I really think that Kansas City is going to like. I don't know that they're going to do it enough to where I'm like, I want to play Mahomes at 6,800, right? But I do think that this is an offense. They lost Rashee Rice. They traded for DeAndre Hopkins. They're trying to figure out who they are on offense, and live game reps against the Panthers could be really valuable in this spot. And the Panthers just leave these gaping holes down. We talked about that last week about Cortland Sutton, when Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton hit against the Panthers. You watch that game and it's just like all this green grass to where Sean Payton's like, yeah, let's just let Bo Nix throw it downfield in this game. And so I do think if the Chiefs are just trying to get things going, getting Xavier Worthy 7 or 8 targets in this one is within the realm of possibilities. And even if they don't, like 5 or 6 targets in this matchup could lead to him putting up 25 DraftKings points. So yeah, I mean, I think he's a really sharp and going to be overlooked way to grab some upside on a week where wide receiver is pretty thin and a lot of, the chalk plays kind of have low floors and easy paths to failure. So why not take something that's lower owned with paths to failure, but also like more ceiling than you can get in other spots?
Yeah, I think he's a guy I might look to. He's a guy I'm going to manually like bump up the projection, because if you just run like optimal lineups, he's never going to hit. But he's only 5,000. I kind of like him maybe if I'm not using Kareem Hunt in a lineup, maybe just say like, yeah, Xavier Worthy got like an 80-yard touchdown pass or something like that. They kind of took Kareem Hunt off the field for a drive. Although I don't know that they'd necessarily be negatively correlated either. But yeah, I think he's a play that's going to see really low ownership that I want to be over the field on. Any other thoughts on the week?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought on like whether to play them together or not. I think you could play them together, like you said, or play them not together. But yeah, I mean, that's a way to lower your Kareem Hunt ownership, right? Is Worthy plus Kareem Hunt, to where if they're combining for 50 points, people are just getting the Hunt points, not the Worthy points. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting. That's like, to me, that's the one-off from that game outside of Hunt is like I play Kelsey probably thinking Mahomes is throwing a bunch, and then I consider Mahomes. Same thing with Hopkins. But Worthy, you're just saying he catches a couple bombs in this soft matchup. So, yeah, good shout there. Nothing else from me this week.
Yeah. So that'll do it for this week of Soloship, and we'll see you guys next week.